Hello, class. This week we're going to talk about voting in elections. What I want to say before we start is that voting in a free election is a citizen's most basic political right in a democratic system. Voting bestows legitimacy on the government by allowing the average citizen to use the franchise by being able to use their vote as a symbol of participation in the system that governs them. It is important to vote because voting provides for free choice and peaceful transitions in the succession of political power. That being said, remember it's important to vote, but let's start off talking about the participation paradox. In the participation paradox, individual votes rarely have any effect on the outcome of an election. Very few elections are decided by one or two votes. Occasionally it will occur, but for the most part, there is a large difference between the winner and the loser. If this is the case, why do people vote? The idea here is there's a couple of ideas why we vote. One of them, a gentleman by the name of Downs, presented this theory. He said it's a cost-choice analysis. We, the individual, will go vote if whatever it costs us is worth less. We assess it as a lesser value as the value of going to vote. So what I mean by this is, if we get off work, we're going to go vote. Well, we have an option. We can go vote. Let's say our option, we can go vote, or we can go home and watch the newest episode of whatever our favorite TV show is. So we're going to do a cost-benefit analysis. If we don't want to miss our favorite show, but we are voting on something extremely important, we want our voice to be heard, we want a certain section, or we want a certain thing to pass to win. If our vote is more important to us than watching this new TV show, the cost of the vote is more important or outweighs the cost of missing the TV show, we'll go vote. If the cost of the vote does not outweigh the cost of missing the TV show, if missing the TV show is going to cause a greater hardship than going to vote will, we will go with we're going to go watch the TV show and we will skip voting. So we do a cost-benefit analysis. This is one of the ideas. Another idea that we go vote is there's something called the life cycle, or the life cycle analysis. As we're young, we don't care. We don't see how voting hurts us, hinders us, whatever. It helps, even helps us. So we don't vote. But then we get into our late 20s, early 30s, and we're looking for a job, and we want to get married, and we want to have kids, and possibly buy a house. So we start looking around, and we see how the government's involved in this, how the government's economic policy is going to help employment. Are they going to get us a good job? Are they going to provide money? The economic policy also. What's the interest rate going to be on a house? Going to be on loans for the house, loans for the car, loans for things we need. Well, 10 years later, the kids are starting high school, middle school or high school. We're still working. We might be in our 40s. We're starting to plan for retirement. Still buying the house, still working, still concerned about economic trends. Well, 10 years later, we're in our 50s. Well, now we're worried the kids are going to college, so we're worried about education for them. Our retirement's getting closer. the house may or may not be paid off, but we're still worried about the economy. We're still worried about working. Our kids may be done with college. Are we done worrying about education and kids? No, because by the time you hit your 60s, guess what? You now have grandkids. Retirement's there. You're worried about your retirement. You're getting ready to leave the workforce. However, your kids are still working. You're worried about them. You're worried about education for your grandkids. You're worried about the future education of your grandkids, meaning college. So what we see is the older we get, the more news, or excuse me, the more life gets us involved, the more interest we have in what government oversees. So we are going to participate more as we get older, as we go through our life cycle, because it has a greater impact on our life. So we talk about why we vote, but let's actually take a look at who votes. If we're going to predict whether or not somebody is going to vote, whether an individual is going to vote, the most important things we're going to consider are what we're calling these demographic variables. The education, their income, their age. What we see is the people who are more likely to vote, we can count on them more often to participate. More education. Research has shown that people that have more education are more likely to vote. A person with a high school diploma is more likely to vote and even more likely to participate in politics in general than somebody that does not have a high school diploma. Somebody who has a bachelor's degree is more likely to vote, to participate, than somebody who only has a high school diploma. And so on and so on. So we're going to look at education. Education, the further you move in education, this is a good indicator of whether or not you're going to participate in politics. We're saying vote, but remember, participation can be writing letters, just talking to friends, whatever. More income. If we have more income, we are interested in A, either gaining more, or B, at least maintaining what we have. We are going to vote for the people, for lack of a better term, those who brought us to the dance. We are going to keep in office those who have allowed us to accumulate this wealth. Because we want to accumulate more, we at least want to maintain. We don't want to vote for somebody who's going to change the status quo and therefore cost us money, cost us to lose individual wealth or individual income. Older individuals, we just went through this. The older a person gets, the more likely they are to vote. For a certain time frame there, it's because of how government impacts your life. As you get older, it has more of an impact. But then also, once you get to the retired people, and this sounds horrible, but really they have nothing else to do, so they're going to participate in politics. This is where they get out and meet people. So they're going to participate. There's actually another one that doesn't come under demographics, but somebody who's going to vote, or people who are going to vote, are people who have a strong interest in politics, or they identify with a major party. They identify as either a Republican, they identify as a Democrat. The practice of voting. How do you vote in Texas? It's actually really, really easy. Texas has always meant to make it easy for people to vote. So who can vote? You have to be a citizen of the United States. You have to be at least 18 years of age. And you have to be a resident of the state of Texas. So these are the core requirements as to who can vote. Can you do this? You basically, live in the state of Texas, be a citizen of the U.S., and live to be 18. Now, there's a couple of things that will prevent you from voting. but it's going to apply to very few people. For the most part, Texas wants its citizens to be eligible and to easily vote. Now, I said there's a couple of items about who cannot vote. There's a couple of things that prohibit you from voting. Once again, these are very, very simple. Those declared mentally incompetent in formal court proceedings. All this means if somebody has gone to probate court and you have been declared incompetent, you don't understand or you do not have the ability to make an informed decision. Those are few and far between. If you're convicted of a felony, you cannot vote in an election. This is one of those kind of moments. While you are convicted of a felony, you can't vote. Unless, if you have not been pardoned, you can't vote. If you have been pardoned by the governor, your voting rights are restored to you. However, if you're convicted of a felony and you have not been pardoned, your voting rights are restored, but it's after 2 calendar years for the completion of your sentence. What I mean by this is if you go and you get sentenced to 2 years in the state pen, you go in on July 15th, you come out 2 years later on July 15th, you serve exactly 2 years, you serve exactly your sentence. 2 years after that, your voting rights will be restored. So 4 years from the day you went in. What if you go in on the day you go in on July 15th and a year later you're paroled? And paroled is different. Remember, paroled is like a supervised release. You're paroled for a year. Well, still, your sentence doesn't end until your parole is over. So you would still serve till July 15th of that second year. Then you still have to wait 2 years. So it's going to be 4 years from the date you start till you complete your sentence. Then 2 years after that. So in this case, if you served a maximum of 2 years, it would take you a total of 4 years. You serve your sentence, you could do the 2 years to get your voting rights back. Okay, this is all it takes to vote. We talked about the bare minimum requirements. There's a couple of reasons you can't vote. Now, there's a couple of other things we need to talk about. In order to vote, a person must be registered. But how do you do this? How do you register to vote? Texas, once again, this is very easy. In person, you can register in person or by mail at any time of the year. And you have up until 30 days before the elections. So what this means is that you have to register a minimum of 30 days prior to the election. It's so easy. Texas makes it so easy. They've actually passed a law that you can renew or you can register to vote while you're renewing a driver's license. So if you go in to renew your license, they'll say you're registered to vote. If you say no, they'll ask you if you want to register. It is very simple. Texas wants a number of people to do it. They want a number of people to vote. To this end, they understand that voting is a limited window. We do voting for 1 day in the election. However, in 1991, the state legislature did authorize something called early voting. And what this means is that for approximately 2 weeks prior to the election, we can go to a limited number of voting sites spread throughout your city, county, wherever you live, and you're eligible to vote in that year's election. It's just going to be early voting, so you don't have to go on the actual election day. This is in place. Like I said, if you're going to go vote, you have 1 day to do it. polls are open for a 12-hour period. There can be a number of lines. People can be extremely busy. So if you can go in, you have 2 weeks to go in prior to the election, and you can go vote. Talk about voter turnout in the United States and in Texas. A couple of things I want you to understand before we get started. Voter turnout. The definition of voter turnout is the proportion of eligible Americans who vote. The proportion of eligible Americans who vote. There's something else called the voting age population, the VAP. This has grown at a much faster rate than the actual voting population. Now, it's important to understand the difference. I'm getting ready to show you and tell you that in Texas and in the United States, we don't vote at a high rate. If you were watching somebody, or if you're seeing voting results, and you see that they say, well, only 10% of voter turnout, only 10% voter turnout. This is different than 10% of the voting age population. Voting age population is going to be what? This is going to be anybody over the age of 18. Why is this important to specify? Just because you're over 18, does that mean you can vote? No, let's go back to what the requirements were to vote. Had to be over 18, check. Had to be a citizen of the United States. Well, that may not necessarily be true in a number of states. You can't be a felon. We know Texas has a number of felons, so just because you're hearing, if you hear 10% of the voting age population voted, that doesn't mean that this 10% of the people were even eligible to vote. Keep that in mind. Try and differentiate when you're listening to these stats between voting age population and voter turnout. And when I say when you're listening to these stats, when you're doing this in the future, understand there is a difference.